In the summer of 1942, the trains never stopped. Every morning, long lines of dark metal cars rolled east carrying fuel, weapons, and soldiers. Every evening, empty wagons returned west to be loaded again. The railways were the lifeline of the occupation, and they were guarded accordingly. Soldiers watched bridges, officers checked stations, engineers inspected tracks, but no one watched the rooftops. 12-year-old Marek lived in a narrow apartment above a repair shop near the rail yard. From his window, he could see the trains pass less than 50 meters away. He had watched them for months, memorizing schedules, counting cars, learning which engines slowed on the incline just outside town. Marek was small, quiet, invisible, and he had one unusual possession: an old magnifying lens from a broken pair of eyeglasses his father had once used for watch repair. At first, it was just a toy. On bright afternoons, Marek sat on the roof and burned lines into scrap wood. He melted tar. He watched smoke curl upward when the sun was strongest. It fascinated him, how something so gentle could become so sharp. One day, while a freight train slowed below, the light slipped from the wood and touched metal. The result surprised him. Paint blistered, oil residue smoked. The metal grew too hot to touch. Marek froze. The train didn't stop. No alarm sounded. No soldier looked up. That night he thought about the engines, about heat, about pressure, about what failed when things overheated. Small things, not explosions, not fireballs, just parts that quietly stopped working. The next morning he climbed back to the roof. This time he wasn't playing. He waited for the sun to reach its highest point, and for the right train to slow down. The second attempt was not about courage, it was about patience. Marek learned quickly that power meant nothing without timing. On cloudy days, the lens was useless. In the early morning, the light was weak. Only for a short window near noon did the sun become sharp enough to matter, so he waited. From the rooftop, he watched steam engines struggle up the incline beyond the yard. That stretch forced them to slow, pressure building inside metal that was already tired from constant use. When the right train came, Marek didn't rush. He steadied his hand, adjusted the angle, let the sunlight tighten into a blinding white point. This time, he aimed lower, toward a dark housing near the wheels, stained with oil and grime. Minutes passed. The metal shimmered. Smoke rose, not dramatic, not noticeable from the ground. Just enough to tell him it was working. The train kept moving. That night, Marek thought he had failed. But the next morning, something strange happened. The train that had passed his roof the day before never arrived at its destination. Engineers later blamed mechanical fatigue, a seized component, overheating, a failure that made no sense on paper but forced the entire line to shut down for inspection. Repairs took hours, then days. Other trains backed up behind it, stranded on sidings, waiting for clearance that never came. Schedules collapsed. Officers argued. Mechanics replaced parts that shouldn't have failed. No sabotage was reported, because no sabotage had been seen. From his window, Marek watched soldiers grow frustrated. He watched engineers argue over blueprints. He watched trains sit idle under the sun, and, for the first time, he understood something terrifying. He didn't need explosives. He didn't need help. He didn't even need to touch the train. All he needed was repetition. The next day, he climbed back onto the roof, and this time he chose a different train. By the end of the week, it was no longer a coincidence. One train could fail. 2 could be explained. 3 meant someone was watching. Rail traffic slowed across the entire sector. Engines were inspected twice before departure. Guards were added to bridges, switches, and depots. Patrols searched nearby forests, barns, abandoned buildings. They were looking for explosives. They were looking for wires, tools, footprints. They never considered the rooftops. Marek changed nothing, except his rhythm. He never targeted the same place twice. One day, it was a housing near the axle. Another day, a valve casing exposed during slow climbs, always small, always subtle, always under the excuse of wear and tear. Trains still moved. They just didn't move far. Reports piled up at headquarters. Officers argued over maps covered in red circles. Engineers insisted the failures were impossible under normal conditions. Someone suggested sabotage. Someone else dismissed it. There were no blasts, no wrecks, no proof. The delays spread outward like cracks in ice. Fuel arrived late. Ammunition shipments missed connections. Entire units waited days for supplies that should have arrived overnight. From his rooftop, Marek watched soldiers grow tense. Orders became louder, inspections harsher, tempers shorter. And yet, every time they increased security, the failures continued. Somewhere else, on another line, under the same sun. One afternoon, Marek noticed something new. A train stopped directly below his building. Not broken, not overheated, waiting. Officers stood nearby, watching the rooftops for the first time. Marek slowly closed the lens in his hand. For the first time since he started, he felt something he hadn't planned for. They were learning, but they were already too late. Because Marek had never been the target. The trains were, and there were hundreds more miles of track still untouched. The order came down without hesitation. If sabotage couldn't be found, it would be prevented. Rail commanders changed procedures overnight. Trains were no longer allowed to slow on inclines. Engineers were ordered to push engines harder, keep pressure high, move through vulnerable zones without pause. Speed would solve the problem. It didn't. Within days, failures increased. Engines overheated faster. Components warped. Breakdowns happened farther down the line, in places that made repairs even harder. A train that stopped in a yard could be fixed. A train that failed in open country blocked everything behind it. Traffic became chaos. From his rooftop, Marek noticed something else. The sun reflected differently now, off new metal, freshly replaced parts, clean surfaces installed during rushed repairs. They were making his work easier. He didn't act every day anymore. He didn't need to. The system was already straining under its own weight. One small failure now caused 10 delays. One delayed shipment meant another missed connection, another line clogged. Soldiers grew exhausted. Engineers slept beside the tracks. Officers demanded answers no one could give. And then came the most dangerous decision of all. To protect the railways, civilians were ordered off rooftops near major lines. Access was restricted. Buildings were watched. Windows were counted. For the first time, Marek stayed inside. Not out of fear, but calculation. Because the more they tightened control in one place, the more exposed everything else became. Hundreds of miles of track now ran with fewer guards, fewer inspectors, fewer eyes. The network was stretched thin. That evening, Marek packed the lens away. He had already done enough. The damage no longer depended on him. The rail system was breaking itself. The railways didn't collapse overnight. They slowed. And in war, slowing was enough. At the front, units waited longer for fuel. Trucks arrived half empty. Ammunition shipments came days late, or not at all. Officers blamed weather, paperwork, miscommunication. But the excuses stopped working. Maps were updated with new estimates. Schedules were rewritten again and again. Nothing aligned. For the first time, commanders began to admit what they had avoided saying out loud. The rail system was no longer reliable. Emergency meetings followed. Priority routes were chosen. Some units received supplies, others were told to wait. Decisions that once took minutes now took days, buried under layers of uncertainty. Meanwhile, the trains kept failing, quietly, unpredictably. Not destroyed, not sabotaged in any obvious way, just unable to finish their journeys. From his apartment, Marek listened to distant whistles at night, signals of stopped engines, blocked lines, stranded crews. He hadn't touched the lens in days. He didn't need to. The system had lost its balance. Every rushed repair introduced another weakness. Every new rule created another blind spot. The network was reacting, not planning. And reaction was never enough. Weeks later, an internal report reached the highest levels. It didn't name an enemy. It didn't explain the cause. It simply stated the truth no one wanted to hear. Rail transport effectiveness has fallen below acceptable levels. There was no solution in the report, only urgency. Marek folded the lens into a cloth and hid it beneath a loose floorboard. Not because he was finished, but because he understood something most adults didn't. The damage was already done. You don't always win by striking harder. Sometimes you win by letting a system exhaust itself. When the war finally moved on, the trains returned. Slowly at first, cautiously, with new schedules, new parts, new rules. No report ever mentioned a boy. Investigations concluded with familiar words. Overuse, fatigue, logistical strain. Files were stamped, archived, forgotten. Commanders were reassigned. Engineers blamed shortages. History moved forward without looking back. Marek never told anyone. Not his neighbors, not the officials who came later, not even his closest friends. After the war, he became an engineer. Not a famous one, not celebrated. He worked quietly, designing systems meant to last. Structures that failed safely, predictably, honestly. People who knew him said he hated waste, hated shortcuts, hated systems pushed beyond their limits. On his desk, he kept an old magnifying lens. Cracked, scratched, almost useless. When asked about it, he would smile and say it belonged to his father. Only decades later, in a bundle of forgotten railway reports, historians noticed something strange. A pattern of failures. Always mechanical, always during clear weather, always near slow climbs. No explosions, no wrecks, no evidence. Just a system that quietly stopped working. They never found proof, and they never found Marek. But the lesson remained, hidden in plain sight. Power doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it comes from understanding how things break, and knowing exactly where to apply the light.